Are you feeling pressure to have all the answers as a leader? Are you wondering how to stay human in a world that's moving faster than ever? This week, I talked with Jim Bouchard, author, speaker, and founder of the Human Centric Leader. Jim's path to leadership was not traditional. He started out as a dropout and drug addict, but it gave him a deep understanding of what transformation really means and why it matters now more than ever. Here we talk about the power of uncertainty, why great leaders share instead of control, and how AI can actually help us become more human if we use it intentionally. If you're navigating change, feeling the weight of leadership, or just trying to lead with more intention, this conversation is for you. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Jim. It's so great to have you here today, and I would love to start by inviting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, wow. Do you want the grisly details?
Always.
Always? Well, I think, I started this adventure, really as a drug addict and a dropout. And I used to think that was a pretty poor resume for people working with leaders, but I came to realize it was a pretty useful one. I mean, leadership is about a lot of things, right? But one of the most important things it's about is transformation. In fact, I'd say as leaders, we're kind of in the transformation business, right? We want to transform ourselves. We want to transform the people around us. We want to transform our organizations. All that's a huge part of it. So who better to talk about transformation than someone who had to learn how to do it in order to survive? So a lot of the lessons that I learned, trying to transform myself, from a loser to a leader, if you want to frame it that way, from a dropout and a drug addict to a black belt, and then later to sensei, and then speaker and author, and all those self-aggrandizing terms, right? So it was a long trip, a lot of different, little currents and eddies along the way. So, that's part of it. So that's where I came from, and here we are today by accident, right?
Well, so it's interesting you say by accident, because I know that it wasn't necessarily a master plan, but tell me more about how you came to know that this was the work that you wanted to do, given your non-traditional background, shall we say, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty fascinating question. In fact, in workshops, one of the exercises I ask leaders to do, and it's going to sound horribly simple and maybe even stupid at first, but I ask them to think about two questions, and we reserve a pretty significant amount of time. If it's not a workshop, I ask leaders to do this at least once a year, and I do it once a year, to just take a day off. Take a day away from everything and think about these two questions, very open-ended. Who am I and what do I do? And believe me, the first couple of answers you come up with are not going to be the most meaningful, right? It's only after we really start thinking about it. And so that's why it's fun in workshops, because when people give me their first answer, I say, no, come on, no, that's not what you do. Let's get into it more. That's not who you are. Let's get into it more. Well, I started to learn this exercise a long time ago, and what I kept coming up with, the answer for both, was teacher, which was kind of ironic because one of the people who helped me a lot in my entire life was my guidance counselor in high school, who became a lifelong friend, a brother by choice, really. Sadly, we lost him a few years ago to cancer, but that was one of his things that he kept encouraging me. And I didn't know why at the time. He kept saying, you're a teacher, you got to teach. So certainly when I got involved in martial arts, which I didn't think was going to turn into a 30-year career, but that's what it was. It was teacher. And what I do now, whether it's writing or speaking or doing workshops, what is that really? It's teaching, right? Which is really sharing. So that's it. That's how I got to where I am here, talking to you. How about that?
That's great. And I would love to hear more you talk about leadership and
Yeah.
transformation, I think are things that you and I have in common. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you see as the transformation opportunity when you think about leaders, like they start at
Mhm.
point A, what is point B?
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky question, isn't it? Who knows? I mean, it's interesting because one of the things I'm asked to talk about more now, in fact, I was just working with my AI guy. I call him Chad. Do you name your AI guy?
I've been thinking about that because I'm using it so much more often. I was trying to
Yeah.
name it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Chad and I were talking about this just a little while ago. The working title is the only certainty, and that comes from an old saying, and I've quoted this many times through the years. The only certainty is uncertainty. Pliny the Elder said that about 2,000 years ago. Lao Tzu said it pretty in a similar way too, a long time ago. This is nothing new. But we're swimming in a cloud of uncertainty all the time, right? The best things that ever happened to us, the really best things that ever happened to us in life come sometimes from the worst of times, right? From uncertainty and chaos. That's where we discover our talents, we discover our courage, and different things like that. So, it's really interesting. That's really one of the things I'm asking leaders to embrace. Celebrate uncertainty. We could say we got to make a T-shirt. Celebrate uncertainty. It's your chance to discover the person or the leader you might not have ever discovered without it. And so that's certainly a big part of what's going on now. And of course, that has to do with the transformation too. Where does the process of transformation come from? It comes from facing challenges, facing adversity, facing uncertainties. And then, like I said, discovering ways to manage it. Not to, it's really weird because not really to reduce uncertainty, although we do want to do that in places, right, where it's appropriate. But like I said, rather to embrace it, to become flexible and adaptable and comfortable with uncertainty
Mm,
because that's the place where how many great things ever came out of the status quo. you
yes.
know
Yes.
yeah, so that's kind of cool, so that's kind of interesting. Did I lose track of your original
No,
question?
not
I
at
think.
all. I actually want to build
Okay.
on what you said because I think that
Yeah,
uncertainty is a really
I
critical.
do that because I've had 12 concussions, so if I go off track, just slap me in the head
Oh
and
my
we'll
goodness.
come back.
No, no, I think uncertainty has, I mean, you mentioned 2000 years ago. There's always been uncertainty, but I
Yeah,
think we feel as we continue down the path that there's even more uncertainty than ever before. And so that can
yeah.
obviously bring with
Well, it feels that way, doesn't it?
it certainly does. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of I don't know, I think people are just moving at a very rapid pace and that uncertainty always brings anxiety
Yeah,
and we're not mindful of it, it can bring really bad behavior. And so one of the things
yeah.
I think about leadership is that when we get anxious, when we get stressed, when we are afraid, we don't
Hmm.
show up as our best selves, right? That doesn't necessarily bring out the best in people if we're being
Yeah,
active to it.
it can, but it's interesting too, and not to lose track. Now it occurred to me what you had asked, that point A to point B. That's why I say point B is that really all that important? Leaders, the best leaders in the world today, the most effective leaders, and I don't mean celebrities. It doesn't have to be somebody necessarily famous. You don't have to be Elon Musk. You can be the shift leader at your local 7-Eleven. I don't care. But the greatest leaders are the people who understand that they don't have all the answers. I mean, we have a name for people that have all the answers. I won't use it on your show. It starts with A, ends in E, right? So anyway, the best leaders are the ones who understand the process of asking the right questions, identifying and formulating the right questions. And that's a continuous process. It never ends because there's always another question on the horizon. So that's why I say that point B, not all that important, and I'm not against setting goals, but goals should serve as an inspiration for us, right? We shoot for the stars, we might land on the moon, that kind of thing. The more concrete our goals are, I should say it this way, the less flexible we are in our goals, it can be very dangerous, which loops us right back to that whole certainty thing. And don't believe me, I mean, so many studies have been done in this area now. It's nice that psychologists and leadership experts are really exploring, academic leadership experts are really exploring this. So you read it in Gallup, you read it in Harvard Business Review, that uncertainty is a marker of effective leadership. Especially, and there's two ways to approach it. We can approach it with external uncertainties, the conditions and circumstances we face every day, which you just alluded to, and also internally, right? It's very dangerous to be too certain of yourself at any given time, especially as a leader. it's very dangerous to assume that the decision I just made is absolutely the right one. It's more powerful to challenge that decision as soon as it's been made and then try to anticipate what could go wrong, like I said, to be comfortable with that uncertainty. And to share that with the people around us, the people that we serve, the people that trust in our leadership, right? Because if they see us as being the person who's only professing answers and too much certainty, we're not seen as certain or confident. We're seen as arrogant, right? And that leads us to another marker that's very strong for effective leadership is vulnerability. And I don't mean coming out and go, oh my God, everything sucks. The world's going to hell. Nobody wants to see that, right? We want to project a certain level of confidence. But it is a projection of confidence when you go in front of people and say, hey, you know what? This challenge came up. Here's what we're facing. How should we manage? How from your chair, how do you see us getting through this? What can you offer? And sharing that, And now we're back to that key element. And not to skip ahead too much, but when people press me to summarize all of leadership in one thought, that's a pretty difficult thing to do, huh? But I welcome the challenge. It actually came out of a television interview that I was doing, and a person asked that. And I didn't have a good answer that day, so it challenged me to think about it. And now I say it almost every time I talk to anybody, leadership, above all, leadership is sharing. A leader shares. The rest of the conversation is about what we're willing to share and how. And that we can spend the rest of our lives doing, right? Hopefully, I'd rather be busy than bored.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think you made some really important points here. And I think that to be able to get to the level or to be able to engage in the kind of behaviors that you're talking about, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable in certain situations.
Right.
Ego is a very powerful force that can get in the way of that fear. So do you see, or maybe I should ask this a different way, like what kind of resistance do you see when you talk to leaders? Do they embrace what you're saying? Does it sound like,
Yeah.
what are you seeing out in the world right now?
Well, that's what helps us book a lot of workshops. Right? Because naturally we all have resistance to these things. I do too, right? And, whether it's a workshop or whether you're doing this work on your own or, you're helping guide your team through this process, it's the resistance that kind of gives us the compass for what we should be working on. No? I mean, you think about it, when we start pushing back against something, that's a really good indicator, right? And it's an indicator of two things. And it could be an indicator just of fear. And hey, that's not always a bad thing either, right? I mean, courage isn't the absence of fear. The absence of fear is stupidity, isn't it? Courage is our ability to take a look at those fears, acknowledge them, and do what we need to do in spite of those fears, right? That's what courage is. And so without fear or risk or danger, there is no courage. Courage is defined by that. So we could go off in the weeds about that because arguably we've created an environment now where we've artificially, or we've given too much weight to safety, I think, and security, right? And that can be really dangerous because the world is not a safe and secure place. I mean, the reality of it, like we talk about uncertainty in these philosophical terms, which is fine, especially if we have a glass of wine, it's even more fun. But, it's inevitable. Uncertainty is inevitable. Danger and risk is inevitable. And how many times you heard people say the greater risk in almost any endeavor is not taking a chance, right? Not taking a risk, and fear and resistance can prevent that. But when there's resistance, that's something to pay attention to. And that gives us something to focus on. Then we can address that and understand, well, why are people, especially as a leader, why are your people resistant to, for instance, almost any kind of change? But I just worked with a group who was going through a pretty significant technical change, right? Now, I don't work on the technical part, but it was really cool to get them in a room and listen to, not only what they were hesitant about in this change, and overall, they were really embracing it and doing well. I've got to say it, there was a terrific group. But when they did bring up, places where there was a little bit of resistance or friction, that was important because those are the things they really needed to pay attention to. The things that are going great, hey, that's fine. You enjoy it, right? But it's really where the resistance, and particularly outside, this was affecting their customers, right? And they were really cool about looking at that and saying, how are the customers going to embrace this new technology? And technology, wow, that comes up all the time as far as challenges that we're facing, right? Adopting this new technology, and how we were just talking about AI before, right? How do we embrace it? How do we use it properly? How do we use it to help keep us more human, not to detract from our humanity, which can be a real challenge. And particularly when you're dealing with customers, one of the biggest challenges I see with technology these days is in customer service, right? A lot of organizations want to automate their customer service. And here I am, the keep it human guy, coming to say, at some point, people want to talk to a person. What's the resistance when you might roll out this technology and say, this is great, it's going to streamline everything, it's going to make your life easier, you can just go online and hit a couple buttons and get your answers. Well, sometimes, right? But more important than that, I always use my mother-in-law as an example. I say, she isn't going to do that. She isn't going to want to do that. She's not going to touch that. I don't care how much you try to convince her it's going to make her life better. She ain't going to do it. So what do you do with those people? But again, that's a point of resistance, right? And by acknowledging that point of resistance and facing it, that's when you start to formulate the right questions. Well, how can I help somebody be more flexible, more adaptable, more comfortable with that? And of course, at the other end of that, we have to accept that sometimes people just aren't going to accept what we're sharing with them. That's a whole different can of worms, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's interesting. I really want to spend some time on the human piece because we have been thinking about, or I have been thinking about, the transition away from command and control. I know you do that too, to a more human style of leadership. But when we talk, it's funny now to think about talking about human leadership, given that AI and these other technologies are rising so quickly too. Like, what does being a human leader even look like in today's world, right?
Given that I'm establishing kind of an interesting relationship with my AI guy, I don't know if anyone else is named Chad, but it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. And in fact, somewhere on my desk in this mess of things, when I'm writing, my desk is a mess. I was trying to find out, because I was taking a more personal tone when I was dealing with AI, I actually asked it, does tone affect AI responses? And it turns out the science is, I don't know how it does it, but it does respond to our tone, and it adjusts its learning patterns that way, right? So ironically, the more human we are interacting with AI, the better, more powerful responses we're going to get. Now, it's critical though, because a few months ago, when I first started to test AI at all, and I had leaders very concerned, was AI going to replace us as leaders? So I said, let's ask it. So somewhere out there, I think I wrote this for CU Insight, there's an article floating around, can AI replace you as a leader? Well, the AI, I hadn't named him yet, but the AI responded back and said, no, it can't. And one of the most interesting reasons that it gave is because it said, I'm not a human being. I can't accept responsibility for anything that I'm sharing with you, And it explained that it was a way of amassing data and presenting it in understandable terms, right? Which can make our lives a lot easier. So my response to that was kind of interesting because in the face of resistance, like you said, I started asking leaders, I said, well, how about this for a challenge? Can we use this tool to help us handle a lot of the mundane tasks or to streamline things, to give us more time? Now, what are we going to do with that time? Are we going to use that time to get caught up in more process, or are we going to use that time to interact on a deeper level with the people who trust in our leadership, right? The people we serve. Can it help us be more human and more present for the people in our lives? And that's really the critical thing, isn't it? Because above all, I don't care what and here's a distinction too you should make. Admiral Grace Hopper said a long time ago, she said, management is about things, leadership is about people. Now, they're both very important skill sets, right? But when we're dealing with people, management processes, management tactics don't work really well when we're dealing with genuine leadership issues, especially when people are facing challenge in their life or their work, or challenges in their life that's affecting their work, right? That's when we have to be willing to sit down and relate on a deep level with human beings. So can it free us up some time? I think so. I mean, I just asked it to report that normally would have taken me 2 or 3 weeks of pretty intense research, and it gave me almost everything I needed in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the cool thing there, and it even said this, said this is the beginning of the process, not the, right? Now, it actually prompted me to go and check on the sources and to dig deeper. And so that's pretty fascinating. I
Yeah.
don't know where it's going, but I'm in many ways, I'm a very traditional person. My whole mission is to keep it human. So it's going to be interesting how we embrace these technologies and make sure we keep human and understand that it is going to displace some people, and we have to face that. We have to figure out what we're going to do with some people who will be displaced by AI. So and other
Well,
technologies.
as I'm listening to you talk, I'm just thinking about too that one of the reasons why we aren't doing as many human things as we could is because of time. And that's a realistic challenge.
Mhm.
But when you talk about the productivity and efficiency that comes from using some of these tools,
Yeah,
ideally, it will free up time for us to do some of the human things that have gotten lost in the shuffle, right? If I'm a manager who's spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to gather information to share with my leadership team, I'm not going to have as much time to work on developing my people or managing conflict or other kinds of
yeah.
human types of challenges. So I'm hopeful that technology can go hand in hand with human leadership if we are mindful and we sort of do it correctly.
If we're disciplined, it's interesting because that's where my past as a drug addict becomes very useful. It's interesting. People ask, how do you get involved in drugs? And well, there's no one way. I mean, talk to any individual, you're going to hear a different story, right? And there's some generalizations, but fundamentally, you get behind any of the reasons, I'll put in quotation marks, that we get involved with drugs or alcohol or any addiction. And what you're going to find is there's something missing in our life, right? And that addiction fills that void somehow. People misunderstand when I say this, but there is a comfort that I found in drugs, right? There was a safety that I found in drugs. That was a place that I could go where I wasn't facing whatever demons that I probably should have been. But at any rate, and those demons were much bigger than the drugs, by the way. So it's kind of interesting. If we have a void, nature, our mind is going to fill that void. So we have to be very disciplined as leaders. We have to decide. And with time, that's the critical thing. Yeah, we can talk about the limitations we have on time, but we're all dealt in any given moment as far as we can tell, right? We've got a day ahead of us, let's say we can count on. I hesitate to even count on that, but let's say we have the day to go forward. So we got, let's say, roughly 8 to 12 hours of working time. What you choose to do with it, that's up to you, right? And if you kind of put this idea together with what's the most, we talk about 3 essential disciplines of leadership: inspire, empower, guide. These are not just pretty words. I think you can tell I'm not the lollipops, puppy dogs kind of guy. These are the most critical disciplines that a leader can embrace. All right. And let's talk about inspire. Well, all of them, but inspire in particular. What's the most inspirational thing? What's the most powerful inspirational action you can take to inspire someone else? It's to share your time. And again, don't believe me. Surveys are rock solid on this, But we hear it every single time we do a workshop. What's the most important thing you can do to inspire somebody, to show them you care? It's to spend time with them. So how much? I don't know if that's all that important. It's like I said, it's a discipline. Is it something you're going to embed in your practice every day, every week, every month? So you're going to dedicate a certain amount of time to devote to another human being. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen, right? I mean, haven't you had that experience in your life where someone really touched your heart just by listening? They didn't have the answers, they didn't have, right? But they cared. They showed that they cared just by listening to you and appreciating what you were saying. So yeah, I think that's really powerful. And that, again, the research is bomb-proof. Don't believe me. Lao Tzu said it a long time. I always quote Lao Tzu. About 2,000 years ago, he said, "The leader is best when the people barely know he exists. When the work is done, we will say we did it ourselves." Now let's turn that into contemporary terms. And I almost sued HBR for plagiarism for this. No, it was really cool. I was reading an article, which was very validating. I mean, joking aside, I appreciate that, like I said, academics are starting to validate this scientifically. The way that I'll just share the way I've said it. And the first paragraph of this article was almost word for word. People perform at their best when and only when they know their leaders care, their work has meaning, and they have a chance to learn, grow, and develop. Now, why it took a $500,000 study to to validate that, I don't know, but I appreciate that these doctorate level people did that. I learned it from the streets. I learned it from working in the martial arts center by helping people overcome a lot of fears and anxieties, by helping people achieve things they didn't think possible, right? And that's how I learned to isolate those three things. But you think about it, I mean, it's universal, right? People have to know that you care about them. And time is one of the best ways to show that. They need certain things to succeed. You need to empower them. And we talked about sharing. That's one of the things a lot of leaders are very hesitate to share is power. Power and authority, right? But those are the two most important things you need to share. For one thing, they only expand when you share them. If I help you become more powerful, which, really we should define, it's not, power and control get conflated. Power philosophically is nothing more than our ability or capacity to perform effectively, right? So if I help you perform more effectively, then de facto, as a leader, I'm helping the people around me become more powerful. I'm becoming more powerful. I'm getting more done. So we should embrace that. And authority, that gets a little tricky because you talked about resistance earlier. I understand why people are resistant to share authority, especially if they feel their position or their status is threatened, right? But one of the saddest things I ever hear, and I hear it a couple of times a year, where somebody will say, I was being groomed for this great opportunity, this great promotion. I couldn't take it. I say, well, why not? Well, there was nobody to take my place, right? I say, oh my God, well, whose fault is that? you should have been training your replacement. But again, I get it. Why wouldn't someone do that? If you're in an organization where that's their sole focus, they're using you to get somebody, to train somebody cheaper and younger, well, probably ought to get out of there anyway. They're going to get rid of you anyway, right? But if I'm training my replacement all the time, and again, we can wax philosophical on this for ages. One of the best things you can do for your own development is to teach somebody else your skills, right? Share your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom. Don't you always learn more when you're teaching, when you're sharing these things? So it's just an ever expanding circle. And that's where we get heavily into what I learned from some of my martial arts masters, who I was blessed with some terrific people that were just great thinkers, and they understood that's how we expand our power. That's how we expand our reach. That's how we expand our meaning in the world, is by sharing. And then the circle gets wider and wider and wider. Doesn't always feel that way in the moment, does it?
Right. Well, that's what I was going to ask you too, because I think that going back to some of the resistance, and especially we just use imposter syndrome since that's
that's what the appeal was to be.
I think if you struggle with imposter syndrome, there's more fear around sharing your authority and your power because you're already doubting yourself and your capabilities. And so it feels like, gosh, if I share my power, people are going to realize I don't know what I'm doing. And so there's that defensiveness that comes in, right? And there are other forms of it as well. But I wonder, just in terms of the work that you do, is this simply a mindset shift? Is there an action component to it? Like, if for people who are maybe still struggling to wrap their brain around what you just said, what's step one?
Well, it's simple. It's not easy, right? Sure, you can just decide to change your mindset. That's a simple thing to do. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of discipline, a lot of introspection, a lot of pain along the way, a lot of frustration along the way, right? Those are all the things we need to accept along with it. But I think to answer your question, I'll tell you a little story. I think it'll answer the question a little bit better. A few years ago, I had really a blessing to work in Cuba. This was a Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions, and they had their event in Cuba because they wanted to try to introduce the Cuban people to this type of financing and whatnot, right? Anyway, long story short, it was all the island nations together, and we were talking about these things. And one of the things that came up in the idea of sharing vulnerability, uncertainty, was that I need to have a good, I don't want to say two-way, a good circular line of communication with everyone in the organization, front lines to the C-suite, right? And sometimes I need to go to the front lines and ask them for help, ask them for advice, ask them for their perspective. Well, as we were sharing this, one young man from Jamaica, he came up to me and he said, I can't do that. I said, why? He said, because in Jamaica where I work, he said, if I went to the front lines and asked them for help or advice, they'd think I didn't know what I was doing, which is what you just said. Well, I just said, but you don't. Because a little backstory he had already shared. He was a relatively young guy. He came out, like a lot of people do. He came out of college. He went right into a management position. He'd never worked through the ranks, right? He'd never worked through the front lines. He had no idea what was going on in the front lines, really. So I said, you don't know. Anyway, long story short, at the end of the workshop, he said, yeah, he's going to try. Now, he had some resistance too, because he was in a kind of an antiquated command and control environment. And, his superiors weren't going to embrace this mindset very well. Okay, so that's fine. In fact, he said they would think he didn't know what he was doing. Yeah. Well, nobody knew what the hell they were doing there, right? Anyway, I couldn't hope for a better outcome. It was probably 4 years later. I was doing a convention in Las Vegas, and this guy comes running up the hallway. He said, "Hey, Sensei." I said, "Oh, wow." He said, "You remember me?" I said, "Oh, yeah, Jamaica, right?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how did it work out? Did you try?" He said, "It was amazing." He said, the people that, I hate to say, his employees, I only use that in a technical way, but the people he served downstream, they were coming to him with ideas. They were sharing, right? And they were talk about resistance. They were bringing him problems before they became big ones, right? Back to Lao Tzu, the greatest problems are always best solved when they're small, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I asked him how his management was processing it. He said, not so well. They still weren't on board. So the only thing I could offer him there is I said, well, you know what? Those guys are going to be aging out in a few years. You're going to be the one in the corner office, and then you can expand on that culture, right? So kind of hang in there,
That's a good point. Yeah. And current leadership doesn't last forever. And I think,
no, they just think they might.
I know, exactly. And just what you said too I think of it as just experiment with some things, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to overhaul your entire personality in one day.
Right. And that goes, you just triggered an interesting quote from Albert Einstein of all people. He said, if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't call it research. Now this is right. He's supposed to be one of the most brilliant people that ever lived. And basically he was saying, well, I don't know what we were doing. That's why we were testing this stuff.
That's a really good frame.
He embraced uncertainty.
Yeah.
In fact, he did a lot of work in it, didn't he? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, this has been such a fascinating conversation, Jim. I really appreciate your insights here. And I know you do a lot of work in this area beyond our conversation. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and follow your work?
Thanks for asking. I'm pretty easy to find. You can look up my name on LinkedIn is a great place to connect. The website, if you're interested in booking me for speaking or for workshops, is thehumancentricleader.org, thehumancentricleader.org. And I'm inviting people to join our network. We've got a free forever level. We are going to be adding more levels as we get deeper, but we're being very generous with what we're offering in the free forever, which is called the Engage thing. And you get to that, join the network by keepithuman.network, keepithuman.network. And come on there. It's just started, so there's a lot of opportunity for you to participate and add your ideas and get the conversation going. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
I'll make sure.
And I hope this is our first conversation, not our last.
I do too, Jim. Thank you so much. Yes, I will make sure that those links are in the show notes for anyone who is interested, and you and I will definitely keep in touch. Thank you so much for being here today and for all of your great work.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for everything you do. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.